The wedding dress hung on the closet door, pristine and glowing, like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. The ivory satin shimmered softly in the morning light, its lace details delicate yet striking, a masterpiece of everything I'd hoped it would be. It should have been the embodiment of my joy, the culmination of months of planning and anticipation. And yet, standing there in my bedroom, staring at it, I felt off. The date had been set for months. Invitations sent, venues booked, every detail carefully chosen. I should have been excited, bursting with the kind of happiness that made brides glow. But instead, an unease crept into my chest, subtle but persistent, like a splinter too deep to remove. Anna was supposed to be my anchor through all of this, my rock. She'd been my best friend for as long as I could remember, the kind of person who seemed to know what I needed before I did. She was my maid of honor, the one who had helped me pick out this very dress, who had laughed with me as I agonized over the color scheme, and who had reassured me every time I doubted my choices. Her presence was my constant, her support unwavering. Every time I looked at her, her warm smile or gentle touch reminded me that no matter how chaotic things got, I wasn't alone. But lately, something had changed. At first, I thought it was my imagination. Weddings were stressful, after all, and it wasn't unusual for relationships to shift under the weight of it all. But as the weeks passed, I couldn't ignore the differences. Anna had grown quieter. Moments that would have been filled with her laughter now hung heavy with silence. She no longer jumped into conversations with her usual light-hearted wit. Instead, her gaze lingered, her eyes holding mine just a little too long before she looked away. At fittings and tastings, she seemed distant, as if her body was there but her mind was far away. And then there were the smiles. Not the wide, carefree grins I'd grown to rely on, but small, fleeting ones that didn't quite reach her eyes. I told myself I was overthinking it. Anna was probably just busy or tired. Maybe she was nervous about the speech she'd have to give at the reception. She'd always hated public speaking. But there was a voice in the back of my mind that wouldn't let it go. A whisper that grew louder every time I caught her staring at me when she thought I wasn't looking. Every time her voice wavered as she said, "You're going to be the most beautiful bride." I tried to push it away, to focus on the excitement of my impending wedding, but the unease refused to budge. It settled in my chest like a weight, subtle but constant, as if warning me that something was coming. And deep down, I knew that Anna was keeping something from me. Something important. Something that had the potential to change everything. The night of the rehearsal was supposed to be simple. Routine. Just one last run-through before the big day. By the time it was over, the church was empty, save for Anna and me. The faint scent of flowers lingered in the air, mingling with the cool stillness of the space. The rows of pews stretched endlessly, their polished wood catching the faint glow of the overhead lights. I sat in the first row, leaning forward with my elbows on my knees, staring at the altar as I mentally ran through the checklist again. The flowers. Were they perfect? The music cues, were they right? What about the placement of the chairs? Every detail swirled in my mind like a chaotic storm, leaving me too restless to move, but too exhausted to keep thinking. Anna sat beside me, her presence as steady as ever. She didn't speak right away, just watched me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You okay?" she asked eventually, her voice soft, almost hesitant. I turned to her, forcing a tired smile. "Yeah, just tired," I said, brushing a stray strand of hair from my face. "It's been a long day." Her lips twitched into a small smile, but it didn't hold. Instead, her expression grew pensive, her gaze dropping to her hands as they rested in her lap. The silence stretched between us, not awkward but charged. I was used to the ease between us, the way Anna always seemed to know exactly what to say to fill the gaps. But tonight, she seemed different, hesitant, uncertain in a way I wasn't used to. She took a deep breath, her fingers curling tightly around the edge of her dress. "There's something I need to tell you," she said finally, her voice low but steady. My stomach flipped, and my heart skipped a beat, the weight of her words cutting through the quiet like a blade. "What is it?" I asked, keeping my tone light even as a wave of unease rolled through me. Her eyes met mine then, and the intensity in her gaze made my breath catch. There was a seriousness there, a depth that sent my mind racing. "I can't keep pretending everything's okay," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I can't keep standing by, acting like I'm fine when I'm not." My pulse quickened, and the room seemed to close in around us. "Anna, you're scaring me," I said softly, though my voice came out shakier than I'd intended. She took another breath, her shoulders rising and falling as if she were bracing herself for impact. And then she said the words that would change everything. "I love you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper but ringing in my ears like a thunderclap. "And not as a friend. I've always loved you." The world seemed to tilt, my thoughts spiraling as her confession settled into the air around us. I stared at her, unable to form a response, my mind racing to catch up to what she'd just said. She looked at me, her eyes bright and glassy, as if she were on the edge of tears but refusing to let them fall. "I know you're getting married, and I know it's too late for this, but I couldn't watch you walk down that aisle without telling you the truth." The weight of her words pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating. I wanted to speak, to say something, anything, but my throat felt tight, my heart pounding in my chest. "Anna," I managed finally, my voice barely audible. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, shaking her head as if to dispel the words she'd just spoken. "I shouldn't have said anything. I know this isn't fair to you. I couldn't keep it in anymore." Her voice broke, and for the first time, I saw the cracks in the armor she'd worn for so long. The vulnerability in her eyes was raw, unguarded, and it made my chest ache in a way I couldn't describe. The silence that followed was deafening, the weight of her confession hanging between us like a storm cloud, ready to burst. I was frozen, unable to process the weight of what Anna had just said. My thoughts were a chaotic storm, each one colliding with the next, leaving me unable to speak or even breathe properly. "Anna," my voice broke as I finally managed to say her name. It came out barely above a whisper, trembling with the uncertainty that had overtaken me. What are you saying?" Her eyes met mine, and the emotion in them hit me like a tidal wave. They were glistening, the tears she was desperately trying to hold back threatening to spill over. "I know it's too late," she said, her voice trembling but steady enough to break me further. "I know you love someone else. But I needed you to know. I couldn't stand there on your wedding day, watching you promise yourself to someone else, without telling you how I feel." Her words crashed over me, a mix of desperation, love, and pain that I didn't know how to respond to. The silence between us grew heavier with every second that passed, and the weight of her confession pressed into me until it felt like I couldn't breathe. "I don't even know what to say," I admitted, my voice cracking under the strain. "Anna, She shook her head, cutting me off before I could stumble over another word. "You don't have to say anything. She paused, her lips pressing into a tight line as if trying to hold herself together. "I just couldn't keep pretending anymore." Her voice faltered, and I saw her shoulders tense as though she was bracing for something. I wanted to comfort her, to say the perfect thing that would make the tension and sadness between us dissolve, but I couldn't even make sense of my own emotions. A surge of guilt hit me, tangled with something else I couldn't name. Something sharp and undeniable that rose to the surface despite my best efforts to push it down. "You don't know how much this means to me," I began, the words stumbling out awkwardly as I tried to process everything she'd just said. "But, Anna, I'm getting married." The reality of those words felt hollow as they left my mouth. I was saying them because they were true, because they were the only thing grounding me in the chaos of the moment. But even as I spoke them, they didn't feel like enough. She nodded slowly, her head dipping slightly as her gaze fell to the floor. A small, almost imperceptible smile formed on her lips, but it was tinged with so much sadness that it made my chest ache. "I know," she said softly, her voice barely audible now. "I just needed you to know before everything changes. Before it's too late." Before I could respond, she stepped closer. Her movements were hesitant, as if she wasn't entirely sure what she was doing, but then she leaned in and kissed me. Her lips were soft, hesitant, and yet there was something undeniable in that kiss, a mixture of longing, fear, and love so profound that it left me breathless. I froze, caught completely off guard. My mind screamed at me to pull away, to stop this before it could go any further, but my body didn't listen. For a moment, the world fell away, and all I could feel was her warmth, her desperation, her love. The kiss was light, almost delicate, but it sent a shockwave through me that left me reeling. It wasn't like anything I'd ever felt before, and the realization of that only made it harder to breathe. When she finally pulled back, her face was streaked with tears, her breathing uneven. She looked at me, searching my face for something. Understanding, maybe, or forgiveness. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. Before I could say anything, before I could even fully process what had just happened, she turned and walked away. Her shoulders shook as she left the church, her sobs echoing faintly in the cavernous space. And I just stood there, rooted to the spot, my heart pounding and my mind racing. I felt completely shattered, as if her confession had cracked something deep inside me that I hadn't even realized was there. And the kiss. God, the kiss. It had unraveled something I couldn't ignore, something I wasn't ready to face. I lifted a hand to my lips, still tingling from the softness of hers, and the weight of everything came crashing down. My chest felt tight, my breath shallow, as the enormity of what had just happened settled over me. I knew I had to move, to do something, to follow her, maybe, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed, caught between the life I had planned and the reality Anna had just revealed. In that moment, standing in the empty church with her absence echoing around me, I realized nothing would ever be the same. The morning of my wedding arrived with an unexpected weight. The air in my room felt thick, as if even the sunlight streaming through the window struggled to find its way in. I stood before the mirror, staring at my reflection in the gown I'd dreamed of wearing, but the woman looking back at me felt distant, almost unrecognizable. My heart was heavy, heavier than I'd expected, and every breath felt like a conscious effort. The fabric of the dress clung to me. Its intricate details that once felt magical now felt suffocating. I tugged gently at the bodice, trying to make it fit more comfortably, but the discomfort wasn't coming from the dress. Every step leading up to this day had been meticulous, planned to perfection, but all I could think about was the night before. The echoes of Anna's words still played in my mind, her voice trembling with emotion, her confession raw and unguarded. And the kiss. I touched my lips absently, remembering the softness of hers, the way it had sent a shockwave through me that I couldn't seem to shake. Every thought I had, every doubt, seemed to circle back to her, and it was enough to make me feel unsteady on my feet. There was a soft knock at the door, and I turned to see Anna stepping inside. She wore the lavender dress we'd picked out together for the bridesmaids, her hair styled simply, and her makeup understated but beautiful. But it wasn't her appearance that caught me, it was her expression. Her eyes were guarded, as if she was holding back everything she felt, but beneath the surface, I saw the pain she was trying to hide. "Hey," she said softly, holding up the veil. "I thought you might need some help." I nodded, unable to find my voice as she approached. She stepped behind me, her movements careful and deliberate as she adjusted the veil over my hair. Our eyes met in the mirror, and the moment stretched out, heavy and unspoken. She smiled, a small, genuine smile, but one tinged with sadness so palpable it made my chest ache. "You look beautiful," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "Thank you," I managed, though the words came out uneven, my throat tight. Her hands lingered for a moment longer before she stepped back, and I wanted to say something, to break the tension, but nothing came. Instead, I turned to the mirror, staring at myself again, feeling the weight of her presence behind me. The ceremony began soon after, but everything felt like a blur. The procession, the music, the murmurs of the guests. All of it faded into the background as I stood at the altar. I could feel Anna's gaze on me, a constant presence that I couldn't ignore. As I spoke my vows, my voice steady but my mind racing, flashes of the previous night played in my head. The way she'd looked at me, her eyes shimmering with tears. The way her lips had lingered on mine, light but insistent, as if trying to convey everything she couldn't say aloud. And I couldn't help but wonder, what if? What if she had told me how she felt sooner? What if I had allowed myself to see her differently before now? What if everything I thought I knew about love wasn't what I'd always believed? The questions swirled in my mind, an undercurrent beneath the surface of my vows. I glanced out into the crowd, catching a glimpse of her. She stood there, her hands clasped in front of her, her expression unreadable, but her gaze locked on me. By the time the ceremony ended, I felt as if I'd run a marathon, my emotions stretched thin and frayed. The reception was a blur of music and laughter, but I moved through it like a ghost, my thoughts tethered to the one person I couldn't seem to stop thinking about. Toward the end of the night, as the celebration began to wind down, Anna found me. She approached quietly, her steps hesitant, as if she wasn't sure she should interrupt. "You were incredible today," she said, her voice soft but genuine. "Everything was beautiful. You were beautiful." Her words hit me harder than they should have, and I felt my throat tighten again. "Thank you," I said, my voice barely audible. She hesitated for a moment, then offered me a small, bittersweet smile. "No matter what, I'll always be here for you," she said. "Even if it's just in memory." The finality in her tone sent a pang through me, and I opened my mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. Before I could figure out what to say, she stepped back, her eyes lingering on mine for one last moment before she turned and walked away. I watched her go, her figure disappearing into the crowd, and something inside me shifted. The sound of the music and laughter around me felt distant, like it belonged to a world I wasn't part of anymore. My mind replayed her confession, her kiss, her unwavering presence in my life, and I was overwhelmed by questions I couldn't answer. Why hadn't she told me sooner? Why hadn't I noticed? And why, now that she had, did it feel like she'd taken a piece of me with her when she walked away? As I stood there, staring at the door she'd just exited through, a deep ache settled in my chest. I couldn't shake the feeling that something irreplaceable had slipped through my fingers, leaving me with nothing but the echoes of what could have been.